Tell me something. Where is the first place your mind goes when you don't stick a move? Now, thing is, if you're like most climbers, it's probably your finger strength or tension or even your effort, and you're already considering some front lever workout or what hangboard protocol to use. But I'm here to tell you that it's possible, probable even, that you're looking in the wrong direction entirely. And that's because one of the most common places I see things start to fall apart is at the very beginning of a move. The part we do over and over, and if we're not sticking the move, the part we never know for sure that we're doing the best way. And I'm not talking about leading with your hips or driving with your legs or any other movement rules. It's much simpler than that. It has to come first for every single move, and it's shockingly easy to improve. I'm Chris Hampton. You're watching Take Tips from Power Company Climbing. Let's get into it. Now, first off, please bear with me. My voice is rough. I have a toddler and a wife that works in an elementary school, so life is just congested. But I don't want to leave you hanging, and I think we can do this. Now, all of these things you hear climbers and coaches preach about as movement rules, lead with your hips, drive through your toes, straight arms versus bent arms, triangles, plumb lines, etc. These are all individual techniques for specific moves, and they all work. Sometimes. But none of these are hard and fast principles that can be applied across the board. And we'll bust some of those movement myths in a future video, but for now, let's talk about something that is a general principle. When climbing, most movements start and end in a somewhat stable position. That's sort of the goal. Move from relatively stable to relatively stable position. And this idea is baked into difficulty. As moves get harder, they usually begin and end in less stable or harder to control positions. Now, static moves, in general, remain somewhat stable throughout, though the middle is often less stable than the ends, while dynamic moves go through a much less stable space, but will, usually and ideally, end with relative stability. Now, in our previous Tape Tips video, we discussed these finish positions and how to practice them. So if you haven't watched this video, you should do that after you're finished with this one. But here's the thing. These stable starting positions shouldn't always be the most stable position. Instead, it's about finding the most advantageous stable position. Let's take runners, for example. Short distance sprinters start with both hands on the ground and their feet in blocks. By the time the distance gets to 800 meters, the runners start crouched over, but standing with no blocks. They start differently because that's what's advantageous for their next move. And the goal is different. The 800 runners aren't trying to create as much acceleration as possible right away. They want to be more upright. If they started like sprinters, there would be a bunch of unnecessary movement right from the jump that isn't contributing to them going faster. Like falling away as soon as you release the hand that's moving to the next hold, or barn dooring after hitting holds, or crashing into holds violently. Getting rid of those extraneous movements very often starts at the start. Now, as moves get harder, we often have less opportunity for stability, or we have to absorb more movement when we stick the move, something like holding a big swing that's just unavoidable. And in that case, we're looking for the advantageous setup position that allows us to initiate the movement and then absorb whatever forces we can anticipate. And in all of these cases, there's one common thing we get wrong that causes the moves to be either unsuccessful or harder than they need to be. Put simply, we rush it, which nearly always means we aren't finding the most advantageous stable starting position for the next move. Let's take a look at a few common examples and then talk about how we can get better at finding the best position. So in this move, if I try to get high enough that I can reach the next grip and then hold the position, I fall away as soon as I let go to reach. That lets me know that either my position is incorrect, and I might explore that to find the advantageous stability I need, or if no position proves more stable, I need to be moving through that space rather than trying to hold position where there's no stability, which puts my advantageous position a little lower and in a spot where I can begin to create some momentum. Now, this frontal lock off is an easy to recognize example, but let's look at another less straightforward example of the same thing. Sticking this position requires tension to fight the barn door. So when setting up for the next move, I rush it, I fall away, and I crash into the target hold. And now if I had taken the time to find the lower position that was more stable and advantageous, I'd have a little more control over the move, and I could completely avoid that big crash. Now, in general, sport climbers tend to be better at this on lower level to moderate moves. They find efficiency. They're used to stopping to clip or to chalk up. But I often see career sport climbers rushing the moves when they're doing several difficult moves in a row. And at that higher level on harder moves where stability isn't as possible, boulderers nearly always have the advantage. But I often see good boulderers not taking the time to find stability on long endurance boulders or when they try to switch to sport climbing. And a bit of a side note here, your most advantageous start position for a move will probably change as you get stronger. Now, if this hold I'm going to requires some precision, but I'm not strong enough to control the middle of the move, then I have to go dynamically, which is less precise. As I get stronger and then can control the middle, that might become my better start. And again, as I get better at using momentum, but can then create enough tension to slow the move down at the very end, that might be the better method. It all depends, but it will never just be about strength. It will be about how well you can move with the strength that you have. And of course, whether you're a sport climber or a boulderer, it's possible to stick the move and then over the course of several moves in a row, absorbing and countering all of this unwanted movement, it ends up taking a toll. Or you have to generate movement from less than ideal positions, which is going to wear you out. And honestly, if you're sticking the move, then how do you know when to reevaluate what you're doing? Well, that comes down to awareness of how much control you can exert over a move, and whether it's more efficient to exert that control or to release it. And this awareness only comes with experience, which usually takes a lot of time, but we have a couple of drills we use to help develop that awareness faster, as well as to improve your ability to find those stable, more advantageous setup positions. First is sloth climbing, or half-speed climbing. You should start with this on your easiest warm-ups and progress the difficulty to a place where you're finding it nearly impossible to stop unwanted movement, things like falling away or needing to move a hand or foot quickly. You aren't looking to climb static. You should be moving constantly, but at half speed, or even slower if you can, and make sure that every movement is as controlled as possible. Foot cuts, barn doors, all of it. And in order to exert this extreme level of control, you'll have to create a ton of tension. You'll have to remain aware of all the moving parts, and more important, you'll have to find stable positions. And while doing this, if you find specific styles of climbing or grip types more difficult, spend more time on those and figure out why. If you find a specific move that you just can't do at half speed, play with it a little and try to sort it out. Just be aware that this is going to be physically taxing as well. You're creating tons of tension over and over, so depending on the goal of the session, you want to be sure you don't overdo it. And the next, which I call false starts, is essentially the opposite of the popular hover drill that most of you already know. Rather than hovering as you get to your target, you're going to hover on the release of the hand that you're moving. And this is going to force you to find that stable position to start out of, or you'll fall away immediately. You should aim to do this on moderate terrain. The easiest warm-ups will likely be too easy, and we want some level of challenge in our drills that comes from the constraint we have in place. In this case, releasing the hand and holding position before moving. And when doing static or slow controlled moves that don't require much momentum, you might want to get set up higher and lock everything down, or you'll have to grind slowly through the beginning of the move. If it's a dynamic move you're facing, you'll usually want a lower, more relaxed position to generate out of. And for some dynamic moves, you'll need to come back to the start hold to create momentum. But for others that have really stable start positions, you can use the discus throw technique to create the necessary momentum. And this is actually one of the places I see better climbers still getting stuck. They set up for a static move and then move dynamically, or vice versa. And if your setup doesn't match the movement, it's going to result in either coming up short or some sort of unwanted movement that you have to absorb or control. And now we have to keep in mind that we can stay in positions that are pretty compromising if we try hard enough. But those will also end up being really hard to create movement from. High effort positions are going to be required on some really hard moves. But remember, we're looking for advantageous stability here, which often translates to efficiency. So sometimes you'll just have to weigh several options and see what works best. While doing this drill, or any drill for that matter, ask yourself questions about what feels difficult. If you're left stranded and can't make the grind, is it in your setup? Can you set up higher and not have to grind as hard to get there? Can you create momentum out of the hole and make it to the target that way? And does that result in a finishing position that's less stable? All right, the entire purpose of these drills is to force you to spend a little more time exploring and challenging the tension, position, and rhythm of your movement, particularly when you're initiating toward the next hold. And over time, you'll not only be able to tell the difference in efficiency between different approaches to any given move, but you'll get better at anticipating which is more efficient. And that means sending more hard rock climbs faster. Give some of these ideas a thought next time you're up against a challenging move. It might just be how you're setting up that's holding you back from getting the next hold or linking moves together. And like I mentioned before, if you're sure you're getting the start to the hardest moves right, but just can't seem to finish them, this video might just help you out with some easy to apply tactics. Our next video is going to explore the boxes that we all climb in and how to expand our useful range. If that's something you're interested in, subscribe so you don't miss it, and please share the channel with a friend who might find it valuable. See you next time.